Not knowing the difference between World War II and the Great Patriotic War is something to be genuinely ashamed of. Most people in the West think they know this story. They don't. They know the ending. They missed everything that came before it. This is the full story, from the first lie to the last surrender. Ask anyone in the West when World War II began, and they'll say 1941, the year America entered, the year Germany invaded the Soviet Union. But that's not when the war started. That's just when it became impossible to ignore. World War II began on September 1st, 1939. By the time the Soviet Union entered the fight in 1941, the planet was already on fire. Almost all of Europe had already fallen. To understand how that happened, you have to go back to 1919, to Versailles. The victors of World War I sat down and decided to humiliate Germany completely. They stripped its military, seized its territory, buried it under reparations it could never repay. They didn't end the conflict, they postponed it and handed the next generation the bill. By the late 1930s, Hitler had rebuilt Germany's military in secret. 3 million soldiers, thousands of tanks, thousands of aircraft. The most dangerous war machine Europe had seen in a century. And he had done it while Western politicians looked the other way because they believed what they wanted to believe. That he would stop, that he could be managed, that the next war was someone else's problem. But there was something else happening that most people never learn. 1 week before Germany invaded Poland, Hitler and Stalin signed a non-aggression pact. Two ideological enemies who had spent years calling each other monsters sat down and divided Eastern Europe between them on a single piece of paper. Poland was carved up before a single shot was fired. The Baltic states were handed to the Soviet sphere. It was one of the most cynical agreements in modern history. Hitler now had his eastern flank protected. He could move west without fear. Germany still needed a public justification, so they manufactured one. Special forces dressed in Polish military uniforms staged a fake attack on a German radio station near the border and broadcast a distress signal. The next day, Hitler told the world, "We are defending ourselves." Poland was the first to burn. Britain and France had a massive army right on the German border. They had made a formal guarantee to defend Poland. When Germany invaded, they declared war and then did almost nothing. Their soldiers spent 8 months sitting in fortified positions along the French border. No major offensive, no attempt to relieve Poland. Historians would later call it the phony war. Why? The politicians had a calculation. Let Hitler push east. Let Germany and the Soviet Union destroy each other while the West watched from a safe distance. It was cynical, it was deliberate, and it was one of the greatest strategic miscalculations in history. Hitler saw that the Allies were too afraid to fight. In the spring of 1940, he turned his tanks directly at them. The Blitzkrieg began. Denmark fell in 6 hours. The Netherlands collapsed in 5 days. Belgium held for 18. Norway followed. Then France. At Dunkirk, something strange happened that historians still debate. Hitler ordered his tank divisions to stop. For 3 days, German armor sat idle, while 338,000 British and French soldiers evacuated across the English Channel. Some believe it was a political gesture. Hitler still hoped Britain would negotiate. Others believe his generals convinced him the tanks needed rest. Whatever the reason, it was the one moment where the Blitzkrieg paused, and Britain survived because of it. But France did not. French generals never adapted to the speed of German armored warfare. Paris surrendered without a street fight. Italy attacked from the south to finish the job. The most celebrated army in Europe signed its capitulation in just over a month. And through all of this, Hitler gained the factories and resources of an entire continent. Romania, Hungary, and Bulgaria joined his side officially. Europe wasn't just conquered, it was now building the Nazi war machine from the inside. That machine turned east and looked for its next target. Imagine, 4 a.m., you're asleep, and the largest army in human history crosses your border. 5 million soldiers. No warning, no declaration of war. June 22, 1941. Nazi Germany launched its assault on the Soviet Union under the codename Operation Barbarossa. In the first minutes, thousands of bombs fell on cities that had no idea war was coming. Kyiv, Sevastopol, Kaunas, Riga, Minsk, Brest, all hit simultaneously from the air. The German plan was built on one assumption, that the Soviet Union would collapse within weeks. Hitler's generals had watched France fall in a month. They had watched every other European army break under the blitzkrieg. They believed the Soviet military was no different. Some German commanders privately estimated the campaign would be over before winter. Hitler was so confident he never ordered winter uniforms for his troops. His soldiers carried parade dress in their tanks instead. Border outposts were given 30 minutes to live, maximum. But the plan broke down within the first hours. Soviet border guards held their positions for days without resupply, without orders, without any realistic hope of survival. The garrison of Brest Fortress fought in complete encirclement for weeks, longer than the entire French army had resisted. These were not elite units. These were ordinary men who understood exactly what this army had come to do, and they refused to move. This was not the same war that had rolled across Western Europe. In the West, nations surrendered, governments negotiated, armies retreated in order. Here the enemy hadn't come for territory or resources or political concessions. The Nazi ideology classified the Slavic people as subhuman. The plan was not occupation, it was elimination. That reality reached Soviet soldiers faster than any order from Moscow could. By autumn 1941, German tanks stood in Khimki, a suburb of Moscow. Their crews could see the Kremlin spires through binoculars. Hitler had already printed invitations to a victory banquet at the Metropole Hotel in the city center. The fall of Moscow felt inevitable to almost everyone watching from the outside. That certainty froze to death in the snow. By December 1941, the army that had swallowed all of Europe began retreating in panic for the first time. The grease in their artillery froze at -30. Soldiers wrapped themselves in whatever civilians they could find, curtains, shawls, anything. Hitler had never issued winter coats. Victory had been promised by autumn. The blitzkrieg died outside Moscow. But while the German advance stalled, something extraordinary was happening behind Soviet lines. In one of the greatest logistical operations in military history, over 1,500 factories were dismantled, loaded onto trains and moved east, beyond the Ural Mountains, out of reach of German bombers, reassembled in open fields in the middle of winter. Women and teenagers worked 15-hour shifts in temperatures below freezing to keep the machines running. Within months, those factories were producing weapons at a rate that shocked German military intelligence. That industrial miracle produced the T-34, the finest tank of the war. Its sloped armor deflected shells that would have penetrated any other tank on the battlefield. Most German anti-tank guns couldn't penetrate it at standard combat range. And when Katyusha, multiple rocket launchers, opened fire for the first time, German soldiers described the sound as something between a scream and a thunderclap. Units that came under Katyusha fire reported mass psychological breakdown. Nothing in their training had prepared them for it. What was also happening quietly was American support. The Lend-Lease program sent the Soviet Union 400,000 trucks, 14,000 aircraft, 13,000 tanks, and enough food to feed an army for years. Soviet generals after the war were blunt about it. Without American trucks, the Red Army could not have moved fast enough to execute the offensives that won the war. The alliance between nations that would become Cold War enemies was built on pure survival mathematics. The turning point came at Stalingrad. The battle lasted from August 1942 to February 1943. It was not a battle in any conventional sense.